Morning everyone. This video lesson is an introduction to the poem Ozymandias by Percy Shelley, which features in the AQA English Literature Power and Conflict Poetry cluster. So in this session we're going to introduce this poem, and the aims are to explore the key ideas about power and conflict in Ozymandias, to give some background information, that's both on who Ozymandias was and also who Percy Shelley was, and just to explore a few key quotations. Now, we're not going to be going through the poem in huge depth and detail. This is just an introduction, so all you're going to need for this is a pen and paper or access to a Word document. So, a statue of Ozymandias can be seen in the top right-hand corner there, and this statue is the key image throughout the poem. The poem is about that statue. So, statues are quite significant as images. We've all seen them. They're ordered to be built by various leaders, and I think actually they can tell us quite a lot about the people who've ordered them to be built. So we're going to start by looking at statues as images, right? So I'm showing you here two statues that we're going to compare. The statue on the bottom left is of Nelson Mandela, former president of South Africa, and on the bottom right we have a statue of Joseph Stalin, former leader of the Soviet Union. Now, what I'd like you to do is write down what those two statues, the bottom two, what do they tell us about the kind of leader they were? So what kind of leader was Mandela? What kind of leader was Stalin? You don't need any kind of history background for this. If anything, that will just cloud the matter. Just based on the statue, what could that tell you about their sort of style of leadership? Have a think. And secondly, how do you think their subjects, the people they were responsible for, how might they have felt about them? Again, based on these statues. When you've done that, see if you can decide which of these two statues is more similar to Ozymandias. That's a fairly easy question. The more interesting question is why it's similar. So, pause the video, have a go at that. Okay, so let's have a look at what we may have noticed in these statues. So the first thing I notice about the Mandela statue is it's quite small, but I think we can quite plainly see that he's smiling, happy face, and actually his body language is quite open and positive, like he's about to hug or celebrate. And that smiling nature tells me that he was probably quite a kind leader. He's the sort of person who wanted to lead by being kind, making people feel valued, that sort of thing. Secondly, I noticed that the statue is in excellent condition. There's no graffiti on it. It's still in perfect nick. Even like the flowers around it are still really well looked after and well tended to. So if people are tending to that statue and maintaining it, polishing it, cleaning it, and the area around it, that to me suggests the people of South Africa respect him. Again, he was well respected. Again, I'm not interested in the kind of history for the time being. I'm just looking at what that statue tells me about him. However, if we look on the right at Joseph Stalin, the first thing I notice is in terms of how he looks quite stern. He's sort of frowning, looks quite authoritative, sneering a little bit. Again, he looks like he's the big bad boss, which to me implies he was probably quite a stern leader. He liked people to follow him by him being, tough and ruthless and, just seeming quite authoritarian, which is a way of leading. And secondly, you'll notice that a lot of it's missing. Most of it, actually. All that's left is its head. So clearly the statue has been seriously vandalised. It's been decapitated, which is pretty tough. Statues are supposed to be quite robust, which again suggests that he wasn't respected. If anyone's interested in the history, that statue is in Budapest, or was in Budapest. It's not there anymore. And that happened. That was around the day of the Hungarian Revolution. Again, Google search that all you will. I'm just using it here to make a point. So let's bring back Ozymandias here. Now, it doesn't take a massive leap to work out that actually, for one thing, his head's on the floor, a bit like Joseph Stalin on the right. So it's probably quite similar to the Stalin statue. And also, if you look closely, the expression, again, is one of quite stern. He's not trying to look like he's a kind, friendly leader you can go and have a conversation with. He looks like he's the big boss. He's the tough guy here. So it suggests to me, just but looking at that picture, that he's probably again quite a stern leader and maybe not that well respected, although you could say it's quite an old statue, maybe that's why it's fallen down. But again, if he was really well respected, they probably would have looked after it a bit more. If you look at like the Sphinx statues, most of them are in pretty good nick at the moment, but this one has been left to decay. So now I'm going to talk to you about a bit of background information about Ozymandias the person and about Percy Shelley the poet, but this does come with a caveat. So while it's important to know this background information, the examiners do not want to see a history essay, right? They want to see you engaging with the words and the ideas in the poem. Some people have really hampered themselves in the past by writing lots and lots and lots of information about the context, about the background, and absolutely tons of it. But in doing that, they've limited themselves because they've forgotten to talk about the actual words of the poem. So while this is important just to give an idea of what's happening in the poem and to contextualize it, don't go overboard. If you want to research it, feel free, but don't go overboard with the history. Prioritize the English. So in terms of Ozymandias, Ozymandias is Ramesses II. Ozymandias is the Greek name for Ramesses II, who was the pharaoh of Egypt from 1303 BC, so around about 3,000 years ago. If you're not sure what a pharaoh is, it's the leader, right? The prime minister, the king, person in charge. They had a huge colossal statue of him built, which he ordered. It's absolutely massive. Well, I say massive, it's in pieces now. And bits of that statue were taken to the British Museum in the 1800s. They acquired it. I presume they bought it. And Percy Shelley, the poet, wrote the poem having seen the fragments. So he nipped into the British Museum one Sunday when it was raining, I imagine, and thought, what a nice idea for a poem. I'll make some money off this. In terms of Shelley, he was a prominent romantic poet, part of the big three of romantic poetry, being Shelley, Byron and Keats. Don't confuse the term romantic with this idea of love stories or rom-coms about boy meets girl and all the rest of it. That's not what it means. A romantic poet, the romantic movement or romanticism, refers to seeing the world using a lot of imagery and seeing it very philosophically. So lots of Shelley's poems, as well as Byron's and Keats, are often, they're very sort of lots of high emotions, lots of huge characters, lots of metaphors, lots of imagery. Yeah, very metaphorical. If you want a hard, gritty look at something in a very factual way, don't read Shelley. It's quite overblown and quite, again, romantic in that sense. In addition, he was often also fascinated by philosophy and politics, and often included his strong views within his poetry, which we're going to look at shortly. So now let's look at a few key quotations from this poem and see if we can link them to power and conflict, which, as we know, are the key themes throughout the anthology and the main focus we should have for each of these poems. So the three key quotations are as follows, and they come in order. So the first one is frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command. That's just Shelley describing the statue's face. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Ye mighty, I believe, refers to God, as in the Almighty. And this is the text that's on the pedestal, so it's engraved in the stone by his feet. All right, so it's what Ozymandias wants people to read when they see his statue. The decay of that colossal wreck. And that's, and again, another piece of description of the statue from Shelley. So what I want you to do now is, first of all, have a look at the quotations from the poem. What do you think was Shelley's opinion of Ozymandias as a ruler? So I'd recommend you write the three quotations down, and next to it, so like using your inference skills, what do we think Shelley thought of Ozymandias as a ruler? Look at that wrinkled lip, sneer of cold command. What sort of leader might he have been in Shelley's opinion? And from that, let's extrapolate and work out what we think the poem could be suggesting about power and conflict. What is giving Ozymandias this power? What is Shelley saying about power, or what people do with power, or what power does to people? And if you're struggling at all, just to remind you, 1 and 3 are describing the statue, while number 2 is an inscription of it. So I'd recommend you write them down and annotate your answers to 2 and 3 next to those quotations. So stop the video now and have a go at that. Okay, hope you've had a chance to have a go at that. In terms of what we can work out from Shelley's views, what I've noticed is I reckon that Shelley thought or is trying to present Ozymandias as a cruel leader. So again, that sneer of cold command, like he's sneering, again, like that Stalin statue. He's not looking kindly, he's looking down his nose at people with cold commands, like he's ordering them. And he's actually ordered a massive statue of himself to be built, which also leads up to this idea of him being quite arrogant. Again, he's saying he's king of kings. You know, I am the best of the best. I am in charge of all those who are in charge. I am top dog. He's even challenging God to look on my works. Look at my statue, God, and despair. Be afraid. Very, very arrogant man. And also, he's not remembered fondly. Again, the idea of it being a colossal wreck. It's decayed. It's been left to just fall apart. No one's thought, oh, should we clean all the bird muck off that Ozymandias statue? No, don't worry about that, Brian. You know, didn't like the guy. Okay, and they've just kind of let it go and let it decay. So clearly not very well respected. So in terms of power, again, it's not formatted brilliantly here, but I had to squeeze it in. It's about how power can make people go a bit power mad. It can make them become arrogant, and also how an object can hold this power. People were doing what Ozymandias wanted them to because of that massive statue that just said, I am in charge, I am powerful, do what I say. In terms of conflict, there's a definite conflict between leadership and the population. Certainly you've got the big boss at the top and how he's trying to assert his dominance by being cruel, by being tough, by being the hard man. Also, in the idea of him trying to sustain his power through that, but that power crumbling away. So maybe, and my interpretation is Shelley was making the point that if you are a leader who leads by fear, as Ozymandias clearly does, he doesn't want to be liked, he wants to be feared and respected. Well, I don't know about respect actually, but certainly he wants to be feared and then to be terrified of him. If you do that, people won't remember you fondly. They won't like you. They might do what you say, but as soon as you're dead, it crumbles away and your legacy is absolutely tarnished. So feel free to pause the video and get down any of that you need to. Again, as with all of this, if you need to flick back or pause it or listen to anything I've said again, that's the beauty of video. Right. So we've had a look at a few key bits. And I was trying to look at a few quotations in isolation before we look at the whole poem here. This will be the last thing we do, because my next video will be taking the poem apart bit by bit and annotating it, analysing it, looking at poetic technique. But what I'd like you to do now then, I'll put those 3 quotations back in that we've looked at a little bit closely, is have a read through the poem and just pick out one quotation you think is significant in terms of power or conflict. It might be one of the ones that I've picked out. It could be something else that you notice. All right, so I'm going to finish off here by just reading the poem. Listen to me, read along, see if there's something you can pick out potentially. And in the next video, we're going to look at how we could pick it apart and some of the Englishy stuff in there, the poetic techniques. Okay, so this is Ozymandias. I met a traveller from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survive. Stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. The one word I think is worth mentioning in there, just in terms of understanding here, you may not have heard of it, is the word visage or visage, line 4, and that means face, facial expression. So have a look, pause the video, pick a quotation you think is significant in terms of power or conflict, and see if you can remember that for next time when we look at the actual poem in its entirety.